Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to a very important show on evolution. I'm here with Subboor. Ahmad. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah.
You're right.
Good.
You're good. One of the researchers at IERA. And we're going to be discussing Darwinian evolution. How certain, let's get started straight away, Subboor. How certain are we of Darwinian evolution? And more specifically, I want to ask you, how certain are we that we have the same ancestors as present day, let's say, chimps?
Okay, brilliant question. All I'm going to do in this show, inshallah, God willing, is show the popular narrative, which is, it is as certain as planetary motion, as certain as the planets going around the sun, that we are certain this has happened, because this is the sort of certainty that Darwinists speak with.
Okay.
And I'm going to show in the...
Are you challenging that certainty?
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm going to show the academics, not me,
right,
say it is based on a probabilistic framework which has multiple assumptions which are being challenged and its core concepts are disputable.
So are you saying that what's happening on a popular level is completely different from what's going on in the academic world?
Absolutely. And this is not just something which I'm pointing out. This is something that even the British government understands, that the academia is... what's known in academia hasn't filtered down to the general masses, which is why they run projects to narrow the gap.
Right.
But what I would say when it comes to Darwin's particular theory,
yeah.
Richard Dawkins in The Blind Watchmaker says, Darwin allowed us to be intellectually satisfied atheists. Before
right.
Darwin, it could have been tenable to be an atheist,
right.
but he allowed us to be intellectually satisfied atheists. So because of that, we've got a deliberate campaign by humanists, by atheists, by Darwinists, to miseducate the public on this particular issue.
Sounds quite conspiratorial, Subboor. I mean,
it does.
I mean, is it just what you're saying, or is there some people from like an academic perspective that have also made the same kind of claim?
Well, what you'll find, and this is very, very interesting, is that mainstream secular academics who are themselves
like who? Like,
atheists, for example, James Shapiro, he is a Cambridge-educated evolutionary biologist at the University of Chicago, and he basically says that it's a religion. Lynn Margulis, she's again an atheist evolutionary biologist. Her end symbiotic theory is taught in every single university.
Did she get a prize of some sort?
She did. She won the National Medal of Science, and Bill Clinton gave that to her. So again, she's an atheist. She called it an Anglo-Saxon sect.
Right.
Masatoshi Nai, who is a don in population genetics, a subfield of evolutionary biology, again another atheist. So he's got these formulas which are taught at an academic level in libraries across the world. He has said Darwin, and he doesn't believe in Darwin's mechanism, he believes in his own mutation-driven evolution. He says Darwin in our field is God, so you can't challenge him.
Right.
So these are atheist evolutionary academics saying this is way more than science. Right? And one other thing which is very, very important, just a few months ago, there was a book published by Oxford University by an atheist evolutionary biologist called Darwinism as Religion. So he wasn't a biologist, he was a philosopher of science, Michael Roos. And what he argues in that book is that Darwin's theory is a valid scientific theory, but it has morphed into a full-out religion. Not religion that believes in God, but a religion nonetheless.
Okay, let's get straight into the question I posed to you in the beginning of this session. We talked about certainty in terms of evolutionary theory. You're saying it's not as certain as evolutionists, or let's say even popular atheists, are making it out to be. So what is your evidence of that?
Okay, all of the people I'm going to reference in this video are people that you can go check up, learn, and you can actually find out that what I'm saying is based on what they're saying. So first off, if we pick up any book on the philosophy of biology, philosophy of biology is a subfield in which, if you imagine a biologist is studying organisms, and a philosopher of biology is studying biologists, how do they come to conclusions? So a basic book on this is Evidence in Evolution by Cambridge University, by the philosopher of biology Elliot Sober, who's an atheist. And what he says in this book is this: Darwinian evolution is based on a probabilistic framework. And he talks about the multiple assumptions which are there. Likewise, we have Peter Godfrey Smith, another philosopher of biology. He published a book with Princeton University called Philosophy of Biology. He speaks about biologists are moving away from the tree of life, which we've been told is a fact, to a web of life. So mainstream secular, and these two individuals are atheists, mainstream secular universities and individuals and academics admit to three facts: probabilistic framework, multiple assumptions which are being challenged, and its core concepts are disputable.
Let's stick with 2 and 3 because 1 might be claimed to be not a problem. I mean, everything in a sense is probabilistic, right?
Yeah, sure. But what we need to be careful about is this.
Yeah.
Remember the narrative they're telling us. They're telling us it's as clear, it's a no-brainer, it's as clear as planetary motion. That's not probabilistic, that's an observation.
Right.
So that's a very big claim.
Okay.
So probabilistic framework is something which automatically lowers that certainty that they're talking about.
Okay. Some would say, though, I mean, we're talking about probabilistic framework. We don't have a problem with that. 2 and 3 you mentioned some of the major assumptions, like you're going to probably go into homology or something like this.
Well,
right?
before we move on to homology, what we need to realize is this.
Yeah.
Number one, Darwin and the way that he framed his theory.
Yeah.
And the way that he propagated it, he did it in, I believe, a very honest way.
Yeah.
And I believe he was a very hardworking scientist, and many of his works have been misrepresented.
Okay.
For example,
right.
if you pick up a book on evolutionary biology today, a book about Darwinian evolution, like The Greatest Show on Earth,
right.
or Jerry Coyne's Evolution is True, you're just going to get, this theory is true, here's why it's true, here's why it's true, X, Y, Z.
Okay.
But if you pick up The Origin of Species, you find that Darwin, right in the beginning, he says something very, very important.
Okay.
He says, you can use the facts that I have in my book to come up with conclusions which are opposite to mine, because he understands the philosophy of science. And the philosophy of science teaches us, one, you can have you can have observations in the future which can challenge your previous conclusion,
right.
the black swan problem induction. Two, you can always have the same data giving rise to multiple theories. Later on in chapter 6 of his book, he speaks about the problems with his own theory. Now look at the honesty of the man.
Yeah.
He puts together a theory and he puts together a chapter about the problems with his theory, and he tries to iron them out, and he admits some of these problems are insolvable, some of these problems are more apparent than real, but I still think my theory is correct. But one thing that he says in his book, if this fails, his theory fails according to him, which is gradualism. That the variations that take place and evolution works at a gradualistic pace. He said, if this fails, then my theory will absolutely break down.
Mm-hmm.
And evolutionary biologists today understand that gradualism has largely failed.
And is this linked to things like punctuated equilibrium?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But moreover, I just want to kind of put a case forward. Let's pretend I'm an evolutionary biologist, and I say, listen, we have a range of different data. We have, for example, the fossil record, archaeological data. We have RNA and DNA. We have the genome development in animals and things like that. All of these things triangulate with each other to give you the same conclusion, which is that every living thing in the biological world is in congruence, but also goes back to one life form. So in other words, we all go back to one, we're all descended from the same kind of singular life form.
Sure.
So this is the kind of primary theory or kind of primary presupposition of evolution. How would you go around? You're saying it's not as clear as planetary motion. But the question is, isn't that enough evidence for you? Why is that not enough evidence for you?
Okay, it's a very good question.
Yeah.
The only way I'm going to change your analogy is that if we were to have a conversation like this, it wouldn't be an evolutionary biologist sitting on the other side, because an evolutionary biologist would know better than that. It's most likely to be a Darwinist. Because remember, not every single evolutionary biologist in the world is a Darwinist.
Yeah. But every Darwinist is an evolutionary biologist.
Of course.
Right. Okay.
And evolution is different to Darwinism.
Okay.
Evolution simply means biological change over time. Darwinian evolution is tree of life and the mechanism. Okay.
Right.
First thing which he said is very, very important. Let's flesh it out.
Okay.
So, you're claiming as a Darwinist biochemistry, genetics, anatomy, psychology, sociology, linguistics, biogeography, the fossil record, bioinformatics, and every other sphere of the subfields of biology
can be explained.
Are in congruence leading up to one conclusion.
Yes.
The very first thing I'll point out, without even knowing any science, is that is impossible, because science doesn't proceed like that. The same data can give rise to multiple conclusions.
Okay.
So that's the first point.
Right.
Secondly, if we delve into the data, we realize there's lots of black swans, lots of recalcitrant facts which resist the theory.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you to define that. Recalcitrant facts are?
Okay, recalcitrant fact is this, right? I've been accused of murdering Ali Dawah, say, right?
Okay.
And I happen to be accused of murdering Ali Dawah Thursday at 6:30 on the 20th of September, whatever today's date is, right? Now, the recalcitrant fact is, you're an eyewitness, and the person filming is an eyewitness.
Yeah, that you're here.
That I'm here. That's a recalcitrant fact.
Right.
So recalcitrant fact is a fact which resists a theory.
Right.
Now, within evolutionary biology, we have recalcitrant facts in genetics, for example, orphan genes. We have recalcitrant facts when it comes to the fossil record in terms of punctuated equilibrium, saltational evolution. We have recalcitrant facts when it comes to random mutations in terms of natural genetic engineering. Now, these may sound like technical terms, but all I want you to understand is...
It's not incongruence.
No.
In a way which is 100%.
It's not the only theory that's incongruent. You can come up with other theories besides that.
Right.
Because remember, I'm not saying those fields don't lead to Darwinism. They can.
Right.
But they can also lead to other theories.
Right. So what you're saying, just to kind of simplify, is you're saying that the data that we have in front of us can be interpreted in a range of different ways. And moreover, you're saying that if we want to stick to the fine kind of structure of Darwinian evolution, and we want to try and create what you would think is like a line of best fit, you'd see a lot of anomalous sort of dots on the scatter graph.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be just one line of best fit.
This is with
line,
any theory.
Every dot's going.
And the other thing is, look, I believe Darwin's theory to be a valid scientific model, theory, and paradigm. But I think the reason why people get confused is because they conflate science with truth.
Right.
Science gives you workable models about reality which are falsified. It doesn't give you truth with a capital T. That's the beauty of science, that it keeps changing, keeps evolving, keeps changing as we get new data.
I've got some questions for you. One of them is that you've mentioned, in the things that you were mentioning as a subfield of biological change over time, you mentioned a few things like civilizational, or you called it basically how animals act together.
Sociological
behavior.
Yeah.
Sociological behavior of animals. So is it the case that here, for example, chimps and human beings have the same sociological, are their behaviors more similar from a sociological perspective?
According to, again, mainstream evolutionary biologists, this is where we have homoplasies. Homoplasies are similarities which are not due to common descent. So we have...
Okay, hold on. Once again, to simplify.
Sure.
So you've got two key terms here.
Yep.
Right, one of them is homology, and the opposite of that is homoplasia. So can we quickly just define? Right.
Homology is an assumption that similarities are due to common descent.
Common descent. So all the similarities that we see in the animal kingdom is a result of the fact that we are from the same, let's say...
it's assumed that we're from a common ancestor.
Common ancestor.
And this is, the assumption of homology goes back to the Padma Purana 3,000 years ago, the ancient Indians. Now, Hindus, because they were philosophers, they were naturalists. So when it comes to homology, if someone uses it as an assumption, there's nothing wrong per se. But if someone says this, and I want you to realize, and I'm just going to test you now, they use this argument all the time. Similarities are due to common descent.
Right.
Hey, look, similarities exist, therefore similarities are due to common descent.
Right.
What's wrong with that argument?
It's a circular argument.
It's a circular argument. Right. Sadly, we will find even documentaries using this sort of circular reasoning.
Is this something which is fleshed out in the academic world? What you're saying here, because what you're saying here is actually quite profound, let's be honest, yeah? You're saying that the foundation of evolutionary, Darwinian evolutionary models, or the one that we're kind of acquainted with, which is homology, one of the main assumptions, everything that it goes back to kind of common descent, all the differences or the similarities that we see, that is due to common descent. You're saying that actually this itself, this foundational thing, cannot be proven in and of itself.
Yep.
Is that your claim?
I'm not claiming this. I'm going to give you an example of someone who points this out. Okay. Now, evolutionary...
So this is not your claim?
No, not my claim, and I'm going to give you an example. Right. Evolutionary biologists, they don't use this circular reasoning. This is used by people who are popularizers.
Okay.
All they say is we assume it and they carry on. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. Ronald Brady, he's a philosopher of biology. Yeah. He's a mainstream secular academic. He published a paper in a journal called Cladistics called on the Independence of Systematics. And what he goes on to say is this. This line of reasoning is circular.
Right.
If you want to say that homology is true, you have to come up with an independent argument. You can't use this argument because it's circular.
But it's something which doesn't seem like you can put under a microscope.
You can't.
So how can you prove it?
You can't. It's an assumption.
Right. Okay.
And you move on.
So if it's an assumption and it can't be proven, what you're effectively saying is that which holds the house of, the foundations which hold the house of Darwinian evolution itself are unsound, or are not unsound, but unprovable.
Of course.
That's what you're saying.
Of course. Well, that's not what I'm saying. This is what...
That's what's being said in the academic world.
That's what's being said in the academic world. Because no one tries to prove assumptions.
But that's very profound.
Well, it is if we understand that the popular understanding is different to the academic understanding, but it's not profound for an academic.
So they find how do basically evolutionary biologists or Darwinists reconcile this? Because how can they be so certain about something which has you could even say axiomatic type presuppositions?
Okay, now this is where it gets very, very interesting.
Right.
I find the language of people like Richard Dawkins very interesting because he is, after all, somebody who is seen as an authority in this field, although he is not. He's referred to as a science journalist. But what he does say in public is different to what he sometimes writes in books.
Right.
Lesser known works. So for example, when he met Hamza in Ireland during the 2011 World Atheist Convention, he was talking about, you don't believe in evolution, it's just as clear as planetary motion, right?
Yeah.
Yet, in his book, A Devil's Chaplain, he goes on to say in this book that future facts, and I'm quoting him verbatim, future facts may come to light which will force our successors of the 21st century to abandon Darwinism or modify it beyond recognition.
Wow.
Right? Now, what's basically going on here is this. He knows what he's talking about. He's an intelligent guy.
Right.
But there's two terms that need to be divorced. Evolution and Darwinian evolution.
Wow.
This is what's causing the... So if I say to you this thing, right? I say, is there a doctor in the house? We need a doctor. And there's a brother who has a PhD in philosophy. It's not the same thing. This is a medical doctor. That's a
fallacy of equivocation.
Fallacy of equivocation. This is what the Darwinists have been doing. They've been saying evolution is true. Look, the cells, they're dividing, they're doing this. You have bacteria, microbiology, antibiotic medicine. And they use that to extrapolate to human chimp ancestry.
Right.
Not the same thing at all. It's a fallacy of equivocation.
Let me ask you a question straight up. We've got some archaeological evidence of Lucy, of all of these different
Homo erectus,
all these different things.
Yep.
Isn't this an evidence? Could this not be put into our database of evidences of the truthfulness of human chimp ancestry?
Good question. All I would do, and I've said this previously, and there's no paleontologist in the world who would disagree. If somebody disagrees, please let us know.
And you've debated Aaron Ra, and he's a paleontologist, isn't he?
Well, he studied paleontology,
right?
But this is a mainstream thing which is understood in evolutionary biology.
Okay.
There are 4 assumptions when they look at Lucy or look at anything else.
Okay.
Number 1 is the assumption of naturalism. Yeah. Naturalism is everything has to be explained naturalistically. Yeah. Hence why Darwin said if there was no fossils, it'd still be true.
Right, because it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because
the assumption is, so this is really axiomatic now.
Yeah, of course it is.
It's incredible. So now it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Well, actually, the analogy that I think is good is, have you ever been to a circus where they have a tightrope and they're doing acrobatics?
I've seen that.
Yeah. Beneath it, they have a safety net.
Right. Okay.
So above, if you like, that's the science. Okay. If they fall down, the naturalism is a safety net.
Right.
So Henry Gee, in his book, The Accidental Species, Misunderstanding the Human Evolution, he's an atheist evolutionary biologist. He's the senior editor of Nature, which is the most prestigious journal in the world. It's like the Premier League. Yeah. So way above people like Dawkins. He says in his book the same thing. He says if there's no fossils, human chimp ancestry will still be true.
And he says that because of homology.
No, naturalism. The assumption of naturalism.
And wouldn't that be coupled with homology?
No, but there's 4 assumptions which are separate.
Right.
Second assumption is homology.
Right.
Third assumption is there's only one origin.
Right.
Which is why humans, chimps have to be put together. You, me, a blade of grass, an elephant, an octopus.
We're all family.
We're all family because of the assumption of one origin.
Yeah.
That's an assumption. Fourthly, this is extremely important.
Right.
Even if these assumptions didn't exist, this is the most fundamental assumption.
Okay, go ahead.
And this is the one that's most challenged.
Go on.
To get from A to Z, we need a mechanism.
Right.
And that's natural selection.
Right.
If the mechanism fails, the history fails. Imagine there's a bridge. You've got 2 structures on either side, then you've got a beam. These structures are the mechanism of natural selection. The tree of life is the trajectory.
Right.
If these structures break, the tree breaks.
So you're saying it's challenged. Why is it challenged?
Well, anybody who knows the basics of evolutionary biology knows the mechanism is being challenged by mainstream academics by a host of alternatives: evolution by self-organization, neo-mutationism, neo-Lamarckism. That's becoming very popular. That's actually a dead theory which came back to life now. Right. There's
no
also
pun intended.
Yes, that's a good point. And there's also evolution by natural genetic engineering.
But aren't these fringe?
Of course they are.
They're very fringe,
Absolutely.
Aren't they?
They are fringe. But what we have to understand is epistemically, something may be fringe, but it's epistemically equal.
Right, okay. So what you're saying here tell me what you're saying. So if someone comes, in a nutshell, let's try and say this.
To summarize.
To kind of summarize, yeah? Assume I'm someone who's absolutely convinced as a matter of certainty that A, Darwinian evolution is true, and B, okay, that human-chimp ancestry is certainly the case, okay? I'm going to come up to you and say, listen, I believe A and B. What would be, in a kind of summarized nutshell, your response to show them that it's not certain?
Okay, good question.
Yeah.
I would, firstly, if I literally had no time, I would ignore the science.
Yeah.
Simply go to the philosophy of science and
go
say, philosophy of science is based upon limited set of data, generalizations, future data which can challenge the previous theory. The same data can give rise to multiple theories.
Yeah.
Just based on those two things, you shouldn't be certain about anything in science, because pick up any book on the philosophy of science, such as Philosophy of Science, a New Introduction by Oxford University.
Yeah.
In it, it says, no scientific theory, no scientific conclusion can be concrete proof.
Right.
It can always change.
Right, okay. And the second thing about human-chimp ancestry?
Well, what I would simply do, human-chimp ancestry is based upon 4 assumptions: homology, naturalism, the mechanism, and a single origin.
Yes.
Secondly, all of Darwinian evolution is based on a probabilistic framework which has assumptions and which is disputable. And somebody may turn around and say to me, yeah, but Subboor, who cares? 99% of biologists believe in Darwinian evolution. I would say to them, well, guess what? So do I. But what does believe mean? They believe it to be a valid theory. It doesn't mean they believe it to be absolutely true. The same thing with me. As a Muslim, I believe it to be a valid theory, plausible theory. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not absolutely true.
And obviously for Islamic reasons, you would opt out of believing that human beings have a common ancestor with a chimp.
No, I would, but I wouldn't even have to be a Muslim to do that.
Right.
Because, for example, someone like David Stove, he's a mainstream atheist philosopher of science.
Darwinian Fairy Tales.
Darwinian Fairy Tales, his popular book. Also, you have people like Jerry Fodor, his book, What Darwin Got Wrong. And interestingly, and I think we didn't actually mention this point, they understand it's not absolute. But interestingly, this point we didn't actually mention, Darwin's theory is unique for 5 reasons.
Go on.
There's no other theory in the history of science which has these things. Number 1, according to mainstream secular academics, it's turned into a secular religion. According to even Darwinists themselves. 2, it influenced politics and it became into a sort of political system within itself. Stalin read The Origin of Species. That led him to atheism. When he killed people, he said that he thought he was doing natural selection. 3rd, an ethical system. People get a meaning out of it. You know, they drive morality from it. 4thly, we have
like Herbert Spencer, social Darwinism.
Of course, absolutely. 4, we have mass propaganda. We have the popular perception and we have academia. And 5, this is extremely important, is that apart from it being a religion, apart from it, the sociological aspect of it, the religion, the political aspect, the ethical aspect, the propaganda, sociologically, if you go up to somebody and say, do you believe in this theory? They're like, yeah, I believe it to be true. Masses of people believe it to be true. But if you ask them for a whiff of evidence, it's just scratch the surface, they don't know. No. And I've experienced this myself. And I just want to end upon this.
Yes.
In Stanford, they did an experiment about social conformity. And they put 3 lines on the board. And there was a group of people. One of them was a test subject. The rest of them were actors. And they had lines, A, B, C. So they went up to everyone. Which line is the shortest? The shortest was C. This guy lied and said A. It came to the test subject. All the rest of them were fake. He denied his own perception and he said A. Even though he knew C was the smallest, which goes to show that human beings are social creatures. We go with the flow and we accept things because of authority without actually questioning them. And Darwin's theory is unique in the sense that you have millions of people who believe in it. It's a materialistic story for capitalism, and it is something which is accepted without any evidence.
Tell us, yeah, sorry, you want to say the last thing?
Yeah, that's it. There's 5 things about Darwin's theory which is unique.
Okay, tell us about this. What's this?
This is a project called Darwinian Delusions, and the only purpose...
What's the ship all about?
The ship, well, the HMS Beagle, 1859, Darwin went to the island, right?
Right?
So what it basically is this. I want to make it clear what delusions is. I'm not saying somebody who believes it to be a valid scientific theory is deluded.
Is this a YouTube channel or something?
It's a YouTube channel, yeah. This is to show that if you believe it's certain, and if you want to bring meaning of life out of it, if you want to bring morality out of it, you know, from Darwin to Hitler, you should read this book, right? How it led the Nazis to do what they were actually doing in terms of their social Darwinism, then I would say you're pretty deluded, because this is a valid scientific theory, but it's not the gospel truth.
Interesting. People are going to be going on that, inshallah, and subscribing to it and listening to more of Subboor, and his research is really truly eye-opening. And I'm sure even if you're not a Muslim, or let's say even if you are a Darwinian evolutionist, you should be challenging yourself and not really kind of relying on like the social narrative. I mean, at the end of the day, social narratives change, and the way they do change is by critical inquiry. And I do invite everyone to critically examine under the microscope of objectivity the truthfulness of Darwinian evolution based on the information. And obviously this is going to be a good YouTube channel for you to subscribe to. Anyways, until next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum.